part of the $350 million request was for charity hospitals. But of course, nothing came of that. The money was returned, and as one of the prior witnesses stated, people were put on furlough, and this furlough is just a tremendous loss of all these workers. More than 3,000 workers were laid off permanently from Charity Hospital alone, and not to mention scores of other people who were attendant in home health care realms and stuff. We had this kind of bizarre situation where if you had a place to stay in New Orleans, you could work at a Wendy's or a Popeyes for $10 an hour. And of course, though, home health workers were making like $7 to $8 an hour, and hey, they went and worked at Popeyes instead of doing home health work. And it wasn't until many months later that people were given home health workers who were trained were given some reimbursements, and even now it's still very limited. But this loss, I was reminded of this past week. One of my colleagues, I was in a health group, the Advocates for Louisiana Public Health Care, before the storm. And my colleague Freddie Monroe, who's an African-American registered nurse who used to work at Charity, and he is exiled from New Orleans, now in Los Angeles. And he basically reminded me that most of the staff at Charity Hospital were African-American, and it was the fundamental backbone of the middle class that the biggest job losses in this city, and still remains that way, is in the education community and in the healthcare community. And most of those jobs were held by African American people, and in education, almost all women, and a majority in healthcare were women. And so according to the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center, our population in New Orleans has gone from a majority female city to a majority male city, in addition to the racial imbalance and loss.
Brad, thanks very much. Do any of the judges have questions?
Any questions?
Just one. You said in addition to the racial balance change, can you put on the record what that is?
Sure. Before the storm, and this can be verified through the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center. I list the email on my handout, or the website on the handout where it can be verified. Nearly 70% of the city pre-Katrina was African American. Now we're at about 55%. They also do further estimates with regards to which neighborhoods flooded. 55%, right? To which neighborhoods flooded, and there were white neighborhoods that flooded, and but as far as the rate of return, and I think that testimony actually was best brought out during the section on environmental racism. I could not really add any more than that as far as that, but certainly the figures could be verified through the community data centers compilation.
You were getting ready to say the rate of return. Do you have that information?
Well, that I don't personally have it, but it could be verified through they have the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center. I guess for the interest of the public, it's gnocdc.org. They have various studies which they have done as far as the rate of returns in neighborhoods, which neighborhoods receive water. They have information about who had automobiles to get out, because that's a big deal. We had 1.2 million people that successfully left this city, but that was because they had automobiles, and they had private automobiles. The people who were marooned here, 135,000 people, were marooned here, and then resettled in other places, including Houston, Texas, and are largely still there. and this is part of the thing that we're grappling with in the rebuild of the city. And certainly, if you don't have public services back, like public health care, like Charity Hospital, which, and if I could make just one final remark here, you know, it is not just my opinion. The New Orleans City Council, on 2 occasions, demanded that the Charity Hospital be reopened. And in this year, on May 17th, they demanded an investigation as to why Charity was closed, and they further asked the State Attorney General, Charles C. Foti, to rule on a law. There is a law that says, it's Act 906 of the 2003 legislative session. It demands that the board that runs charity hospitals, in this case LSU, that it receive legislative permission to close a hospital or emergency department. And they tell us how you can do it through a concurrent resolution. And basically the City Council asked the Attorney General, well, what's the validity of this law? And the Attorney General concurred in an opinion on June 18th, which was released on July 26th, that said that LSU would have to have legislative permission to close the hospital. And as has been confirmed by the state legislature, they have not received the permission. So hopefully before too long we'll have a legal action. But you know, it kind of underscores the unwillingness of reopening facilities that could help people now. When I came back to the city, and I was privileged than most because my home was not flooded. I lived in the 20% of New Orleans that was not flooded. I didn't know that Charity Hospital had air conditioning and all that, and it could have been reopened. Instead, I ended up in a tent, in a field tent, in a parking lot where we had care, and the medical workers did their very best, and I can't thank them enough. But subsequently, we had been put on the floor of the convention center where just a few months before, people were stranded there. And then we were brought to a flooded shopping center by the Superdome, which still operates as a clinic, by the way. So here, Charity Hospital, which first floor didn't flood it, and we were brought to a shopping center which did flood. And it had the kind of stinky smell for a few months of what we experienced coming back. You know, when you come back and you hadn't opened up your refrigerator. That's the kind of thing that we had to deal with for a few months. And so we are just left with being marooned and being abandoned.
Thank you.
So you said that the population of New Orleans shifted from being primarily women to being primarily male. Do
That's
you
correct.
know the exact figures or close?
From what I remember on and this can be verified once again on the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center website, it was approximately 52% female before the storm, and it's now 52% male. It has been conjectured that there was the job loss of education, and I guess if you've had the education panel, you will have known that you know, the teachers union they all lost all their jobs and got fired, and they're only now starting to hire back people. And healthcare, it's the same situation. And then it also needs to be noted that a majority of the households in public housing in New Orleans were led by women.
We have received testimony with respect to that.
But that's another issue with that would explain that, is that by keeping housing closed, and then of course we've had an influx of contractors who are mostly male to capitalize on the rebuild or whatever.
I think there was another question, Dr. Garcia.
Okay. Una reflexión. Los testimonios que he escuchado. Ok, Marta, escucha. Cuando escucho los testimonios, cierro mis ojos. No se escucha, Marta, afuera, aquí. Ok. Vea. Yo te escucho, pero ellos no. Ajá.
Hello, ¿me oye?
Ahora sí.
Ok.
Muy bien, cuando escucho los testimonios, yo cierro mis ojos
He says when he hears the testimonies, he closes his eyes
para construir las imágenes.
so that he can create the images in his mind.
Entonces, estoy viendo
He is seeing
dos formas de asesinar a New Orleans.
various forms of the assassination of New Orleans,
Como intentaron hacerlo con Haití
as they tried to do with
en el
Haiti,
siglo XIX
in the 19th century,
y con Cuba en el siglo XX,
and Cuba in the 20th century.
que es a través del bloqueo.
That it's through the process of blockade,
De prohibir toda ayuda.
to prevent any assistance.
Y la segunda forma de asesinato
The second system of assassination
es profundizando una enfermedad que en inglés se llama homesick.
it's the process of deepening homesickness,
de rendre plus important la nostalgie.
Quiero conocer su opinión sobre esa reflexión.
He wants to know the witness's reflection on what he has said.
Il voudrait savoir ce que vous pensez de ce qu'il a dit.
It's true. It's true. It's outrageous. It's a scandal. And part of the issue with healthcare in particular, we haven't had a large social movement to counter it because most patients, if you don't have a doctor lined up, I mean, you don't have a good clinic, you're not back here in New Orleans. And the health workers, the other backbone of our movement pre-Katrina, are largely gone, and the ones who are here are working double shifts. And I know I mentioned Freddie, he was offered his job back, but he had to sign a waiver stating that he had to do mandatory overtime. You know, it's sort of, you know, indentured servitude to come back home. It's outrageous. And, you know, I was a veteran of the, you know, it should also be noted, I'm sorry, but I have to note this. It hasn't just been the state of Louisiana that's been a problem. The federal government, in the delight of Health and Human Services Secretary Michael Levitt, said that since the flagship of the charity hospital system was closed, then maybe we can shift health care from disproportionate share, which takes care of the poor and uninsured, to subsidizing private insurance. And that's the model for America, frankly. It's certainly happening in Massachusetts, where there's a mandate to buy insurance, and you know, there's a lot of debate of how that goes. But for them to use the storm to redefine our city, and for the people who are not here not to be able to make the decision, it's disenfranchisement of our own people, and it's outrageous. And if it would happen in any other place, you know, particularly if it was a friendly government to the U.S., we'd be protesting. We might even be starting a war. But here, we don't have it. But my hope is that particularly for this tribunal, and I thank you very much for being invited to speak and give testimony, that our voices, we do not know what drop of water will cause the bucket to overflow. And all the people who have done good work here, and there has been a whole measure of good work in New Orleans. We are only going to be able to make it with you as we stand in solidarity to do so.
Is there anything else? Or?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to formally enter his statement that you all have into evidence.
What exhibit is that? Well, that would be, I think, exhibit number 2?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to all the witnesses and the judges. You were all wonderful. Thank you.